Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Assemblywoman Sandra Howdigi. I represent Assembly District 41, and I'm happy to be here today with everyone to speak about an issue that's important to all of us. We all want to protect our public lands. We all here believe in climate change and investing in renewable resources. You know, in 2019 in Nevada, we passed historic landmark legislation because we elected Democrats up and down the ballot. We were able to protect water in Nevada, pass 50% RPS by 2030, and that's what's at stake for America this election cycle. We have one shot at electing a president who cares about the issues that we care about. So we need to make sure that we elect the right Democratic nominee who can win in November. I'd like to start by letting us all introduce ourselves. Why don't we start with Barbara?
Hello, my name is Barbara Hartzell. I'm from the Chemehuevi Indian tribe and the direct descendant of the Las Vegas Indian colony. And this is my daughter, Bunny Bonifacio.
Hi, my name is Taylor Patterson. I am an enrolled member of the Bishop Paiute tribe, and I was born and raised here in Las Vegas.
Levi Kamolnik with Environment Nevada.
Rudy Zamora, Program Director for Chispa, Nevada. It's a program of the League of Conservation Voters.
I'm Andy Magi, the Executive Director of the Nevada Conservation League.
I'm Annette Magnus. I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress, and I was also born and raised here in Las Vegas.
Well, I'm excited to be here as Pete Buttigieg launches his public lands policy. Mayor Pete?
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Assemblywoman, for your leadership and all of the work that you're doing to serve so well the Nevadans who are counting on you. And having traveled the country, I have to say Nevada's Assembly in particular is remarkable in the work that you all are doing, and I think is a model that the country can look to. And I'm so thankful for all of our panelists for the expertise you're going to bring, and looking forward to a discussion that I hope will help shine more of a national light on the urgency of the issues of protecting public lands that you are working with and on day in and day out. And this is an exceptionally agreeable environment to be campaigning into. I wish I could do this more often. So Indian country first came to the state of Indiana just a couple of years ago with the federal recognition of the Potawatomi tribe in the Pokagon Band. And they often speak, the tribal citizens who are also citizens of my community, speak often about the need to look to decisions for the effect that they will have across 7 generations. And I know that has been a touch point that many Native communities speak to that I think would be wise for America as a whole to think about. And that is the kind of long-term generational approach that is appropriate for us to think about public lands that we are simply the stewards of and responsible not only for ensuring that they are equitably and fully protected in our time, but knowing that the decisions we make right now will have implications for years and for generations to come. That is only more acute in the era in which we are confronting climate change. And so we have a responsibility, I think, to view all of these questions in an integrated way. We know that our public lands and our public waters are among the greatest assets that our country has. They power economies, they represent our cultural heritage, and they help define who we are as a country. And as mayor, I also have a soft spot for anything related to parks and recreation, having emerged from Indiana and knowing that there's also such a treasure in terms of the assets recreationally, but also that this reflects on our public health and our well-being as a country. And I don't have to tell Nevada how much is at stake right here in the state, because some of the most remarkable and nationally distinctive public lands are right here in the state, from Red Rock Canyon National Recreation Area, not far from here, to the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, which is the largest in the continental United States. And Nevada has been a leader in supporting public lands. The establishment of the Division of Outdoor Recreation, the authorization of $200 million of bonds to invest in conservation projects, and a vision that I also think has been able to attract a lot of bipartisan support in a way that has lessons for what we have to do nationally. Growing recreation for an industry that is supporting over $10 billion in economic activity and over 87,000 jobs. And so what I'd like to talk about today is the need for us to have a new approach in the United States federal government that mirrors some of the best elements of what's being practiced right here in Nevada. That means making sure that public lands and waters are at the heart of our climate solutions. We talk often about climate change in the abstract, but a lot of how we can actually meet our goals is at stake in the way that we handle our public assets. I believe we must set a national goal to protect and restore at least 30% of United States lands and oceans by the year 2030. It's an ambitious goal. I also think it's one that we can rally as a country to achieve. We need to strengthen protections for the public lands that we have today that are often under threat from development for oil, gas, and mining industries without regard to the long-term consequences. We have to make sure that we secure a sustainable water future for Nevada and for the West. And again, every mayor thinks and talks and works a lot on water because it is one of those essential things that almost by design we are supposed to be able to take for granted in our day-to-day lives. But the moment that it comes under threat, nothing else is achievable. We need to prepare for natural disasters that will happen and unfortunately are going to happen with increasing severity and frequency across the United States, including in our public lands. And so we have to act to protect families, to protect communities, to support wildlife habitat, and protect rangelands from catastrophic wildfires. And that does require a greater federal investment in fire protection. We have to invest in the resilience of communities. Not all of the answers have to come from Washington, but more of the funding should. And that's why I believe in creating community resilience hubs with federal dollars. We need to recognize the rights of tribal nations to manage their reservation communities and resources and partner with tribes in a way that respects the sovereignty of those who are tribal citizens as well as U.S. citizens. We need to oppose storing nuclear waste at Yucca Mountain in a way that has completely disregarded the consent-based model that is supposed to be at the heart of how these issues are managed, and open a new dialogue about responsible solutions for the future. And we need to ensure that mining operations are going to develop in a way that minimizes environmental protection, minimizes environmental harm through protection, that creates economic opportunity in an equitable fashion, and that maximizes the protection for Nevada communities. So these are just some of the examples of the steps that we need to take through a comprehensive plan. The details are available at peteforamerica.com, but I'm looking forward to kicking the tires on these policies together, as well as having a conversation about what's at stake with those who are living and breathing these issues on a daily basis.
And, it's an important issue here. Ecotourism in Nevada brings in about $12 billion a year and creates about 87,000 jobs a year. And, I'm excited about the timeline for your policy. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so again, we need to set concrete targets in order to implement these protections. And it's why I think that 30 by 30 concept is so important when it comes to establishing the 30% goal. We also need to make sure that we're setting very ambitious targets on our climate plan overall. So we believe that as early as 2025, we can double clean energy generation, and by 2035 have a zero-emission clean energy system. Now, that's going to involve a lot of change and a lot of investment. I also think it's going to involve a lot of opportunity. And one of the things that excites me most, again, about Nevada's leadership in areas like solar is that we've seen the economic benefit, not only of preventing harm in the industries that you've been describing that rely so much on ecological stewardship, but also creating new opportunity through these forms of environmental leadership.
Okay, why don't we hear from some of our panelists? Taylor?
Got to press my button harder. So I notice you talk a lot about the preservation of our lands, which I very much appreciate, and keeping those national spaces protected. However, this country has a history of protecting our lands from us, meaning they'll create a national park, they'll create this protected space, and not allow our people to go onto those lands and harvest either our sacred resources, be a part of the prayer, be a part of that space. So how do you plan on integrating our voices? Because whether it's a protected land or this land, it's all ours. I hate to be so frank like that, but I appreciate you recognizing that and I read your plan last night, it's very good. I appreciate you wanting us to have control over our reservation lands, but these federal spaces too are really important to us as well, especially Gold Butte and these really sacred places that are under attack, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that the relationship with tribes has to go beyond federally recognized Indian country, although we have very strong views on making sure that we enhance the sovereign ownership, leadership, and management of decisions that are made on, of course, on tribal lands. But this is an example why, for example, we ought to restore the White House Tribal Nations Conference and recognize that the concerns of tribes over all of the affairs of the entire United States deserve to be heard. I view it as an intergovernmental relationship. In the same way that the federal government relates to cities, relates to states, we need to have that same framework for relating to tribes. And it's also going to require, I think, some legislation to really enshrine that idea of free, prior, informed consent, certainly in Indian country as such, but also to ensure that stakeholders are consulted. And as you say, that when there are protections, they happen in concert with and not at the expense of tribal nations who, after all, are the original stewards of all land, whether it's designated as part of Indian country or not.
Thank you. Let's take it to the other side. Annette?
So, as a native Nevadan, one of the things that I feel we have done our part in is our nuclear history. We have given up our federal lands to the federal government, and they pretty much have done whatever they wanted on those lands for a long time now. And now they want to take over land that is tribal land, the Western Shoshone tribe land, to create a nuclear waste dump. And in my opinion, we should not be putting nuclear waste in our backyard. We don't have any nuclear facilities in Nevada that even create that waste. And so why do we need to be the dumping ground for the rest of the country? So what would you do on Yucca Mountain?
So I think, first of all, you're raising a really important point. Nevada is a great place for generating electric power, but not by nuclear means. And so there's something especially strange about expecting, without consent, that Nevadans would accept the routing of waste here. I believe that we should return to the framework that the Blue Ribbon panel put forward, which is about a consent-based model. And if the consent is not arriving, neither should the waste. There are not going to be any easy fixes when it comes to nuclear, but there are other technologies being developed and explored that include everything from new means to make on-site storage safer to other ways to ensure that it can be managed. And what we cannot have is the state of Nevada being taken by surprise, which is part of what we saw a couple of times in this administration, or anything that rolls over the importance of Nevadan voices. And as long as the people of Nevada are opposed to storage at Yucca Mountain, then so am I.
Andy, you look like you had a question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I'm eager to hear your views and perspectives too, so it doesn't all have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, having an opportunity to have gone through your plan, I think the notion of protecting 30% of our land is really critical. We have standards for renewable energy. We have standards for a number of other things. And so really putting some goals around land protection, I think, is incredibly important, not only because what it can mean for our ecosystems and the environment, but for the communities that recreate, participate, go about their activities on those lands. So I think one of the questions I have is, when we seek out, this goal, how do you see your agencies, the agencies that are going to be doing some of this designating and management and things like that, pulling in stakeholders, pulling in partners to make sure we're not, that this is a community-driven process for protecting these lands? So
part of my perspective coming out of being a mayor is the importance of putting communities at the forefront. And again, I think often the answer is not going to come from Washington, but more of the resources should. And so we need to make sure that state, local, tribal, and other stakeholders are included at the table as we take these steps. But what we know is that, first of all, the agencies have to be committed to this vision. And this should go without saying, but unfortunately it doesn't today. The heads of these agencies will believe in their missions. We will have a head of environmental protection who believes in environmental protection, a head of the Department of the Interior who is committed to protecting public lands. Again, this should be table stakes, but we are now at a moment where I think it does have to be said and committed to in advance. We also, I think, should put out a call to service for those who are motivated to play a role, to join the ranks of public servants that I think have largely been demoralized and even gutted in some departments by the atmosphere of this administration that seems to have so little respect for those roles. We need to make sure that we are very transparent about how we're tracking to those goals. I've seen the power of putting a yardstick out there and then racing to meet it. Because it creates a kind of pressure, kind of accountability for everybody. But of course, it does no good just to mention a goal if you're not prepared to resource it. And that's why I think this needs to be included in our federal budgeting. And it needs to be included in terms of the overall strategy when we're seeking to do other things. So we cannot talk about a climate change strategy over here and then a public land strategy over there. They should be integrated. And another goal that we're setting is to have public lands themselves become carbon neutral very quickly through everything from carbon removal to ensuring that we have new and more sustainable ways of managing them. And I'm very excited about how that could wind up leading the way for a lot of other parts of our society and our economy and our government to meet climate goals, but with public lands and waters at the heart.
And these are issues that really affect the Hispanic community a lot as well. And Rudy, if as the executive director of CHISPA, what would you like to see?
I mean, I think, first of all, Mayor Pete, thank you for addressing the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the plan. One of the things that we need that you mentioned in your plan is permanent funding for that. As the Assemblywoman mentioned, the Latino community takes advantage of public lands. Growing up, my family and I did not have the luxury of going to Disneyland every summer, going out to all these other places, but we had the access to Mount Charleston, Red Rock, and all the different public lands that we have here locally. And when we're talking about LWCF, it's not just the big parts. It's your local park, it's your local pool that gets this funding. So those are areas that our communities till this day enjoy. And when we're talking about potentially not having that funding and closing down the local park, it's something that affects our communities on a day-to-day. Yeah. So when we're talking about communities of color and the Latino community in particular, the other thing that we enjoy doing is not only going outdoors, but actually it's more of a family bonding thing. So it's the outdoors, but it's the way that our families bond. It's the stories that I have. It's the stories that I'm trying to build with my 5-year-old son now. It's how we connect. So how do you plan to permanently fund that? I know that's a big question right now. We have funding for it now, but what would your administration do to ensure that it's permanently funded?
Yeah, so part of it is, as you say, ensuring as part of our appropriations process that the federal funding is permanent. But part of it also is looking for ways to continue to support and expand community-based efforts, as you say, for these maybe less celebrated and less grand, but very important publicly held. I mean, a pocket park on a corner, that's public land too. And often that's the public land that kids in a neighborhood will have the easiest time getting to. And this is something that we became very intentional about in my city, going so far as to use new technological tools to try to find out how many kids are really within a 10-minute walk, and a safe one, of a park resource. And this is a question, as you say, about culture, because this is where experiences are created. This is a question about public health. We know that some of the public health disparities and the different outcomes for Latino and Black and Native families are driven by these environmental factors. Something as simple as whether there is a safe place to go play and spend time outside. It's one thing to encourage people to have active lifestyles. It's another to actually make it possible. And this is why I was so concerned in the president's most recent budget that they actually zeroed out community development block grants, for example. CDBG is just one of the tools that local communities can use to create an environment that fosters at low or no cost to individuals the kinds of opportunities you're talking about. So yes, we protect the relevant federal funding streams for federal land and federal purposes, but also we should be supporting communities that know best how to create opportunity. And you can't separate this from questions of racial justice, because disproportionately it is Americans of color who are reliant on and frankly know how to unlock the value of these lands that are in public trust.
I'm going to bring it over to Barb, because you are a Native American leader here in our community, and you're sitting with someone who's a future generation who we're trying to preserve these public lands for. So talk to us a little bit about what you would like to see.
Definitely. Definitely the preservation of our lands, but it's also the acknowledgement of it. Like when we talk about the state of Nevada, we talk about lands we gave up and we never acknowledged, no, those were lands that were stolen, forcibly stolen and forcibly given up. And then they were put into a public hands, which is the federal government, to determine what's important to us as natives who live here and have thrived here. And so, you know, the lands that we do have, what little we were forced into, are usually the ones, like you said, that are most likely going to end up by mining or anything that's going to cause us harm. I grew up on the Indian colony. We had our trains go through there, idle through there. It was never thought of anything big or anything that wasn't normal outside of that. But it's also looking into like the preservation of like wildlife and what comes with all of that. And I feel like sometimes us as indigenous people are put in direct competition with those other aspects of our environment, such as our public lands. It's important for us to preserve these, to go hiking and fishing and all of that stuff, but at the same time, you know, we're here, we exist, we're not mythological, and we could tell the stories and why those places are important to us, but also there's a last bit of connection to people like our grandmothers who we never even got the opportunity to meet. And so just looking at it in that aspect of like, I've read through the plan of, like you said, the informed consent from folks from the community to be able to make these decisions, but also acknowledging the past of what it caused this and what led to this law is really what I pass down to my daughter. I want her to know where she comes from. I want her to know why these lands are important to her, more than just that you're an indigenous woman. These are important here because these are the lands your grandmothers worked on. These are the lands your grandmothers lived on, and these are the lands that we will return to. So that's just the perspective of what I want to pass down to my daughter and why I continue to do the work I do.
It's such a moving perspective, and I think it illustrates how this is part of a thread that runs through time from the way that we came to be here in this situation to begin with to a future that you envision that goes beyond our own lifetimes. And it's exactly why we need to have this consultation be woven into the processes of decision making. Thank you. Yeah.
I just want to kind of bounce off that and bring the conversation to water conservation specifically. Barb and my tribe, both of them have had huge water issues. Where my tribe is from in the Owens Valley, LA County Department of Water and Power owns more land in Inyo County than they do in Los Angeles. And so luckily we're in a position now where lands are not going to be so forcibly taken. Those lands from my tribe are gone forever. There's no getting them back, and that's what it is. But we have an issue now where Las Vegas is running out of water as we speak. And so Las Vegas, Clark County starts looking for water in other places, and where do they naturally go? To tribal lands, tribal resources. And they're looking at that same idea of using a pipeline to bring water from the north down here to the south. And, you know, Barb touched a little bit on our creation and our origin. And for my tribe, we were taught that we were put there by those waters on purpose. We were meant to be protectors and guard that water resource. And how, I noticed on your plan, you said you were committed to stopping any sort of DAPL situations before they occur. So how can the federal government, your administration specifically, kind of protect those water resources and stop this, you know?
Yeah, so part of it, as you say, is to make sure that these encroachments can't happen because there's a greater degree of protection. Part of it also is that as a country, we've got to do a better job of managing the water resource we do have. And because we have, I think, in many ways become accustomed to a certain way of doing things that's no longer sustainable, it's creating these pressures that lead to those encroachments that could be avoided just by better using the resources. That's why I'm proposing that we expand funding for things like the Water Smart program that the Bureau of Water Reclamation has, and other ways that we can make sure that we're being more efficient with what we have. You know, in the same way that with energy, there are all these talks of the different kinds of fuels, but the so-called fifth fuel is efficiency. It's using less in the first place. The same is clearly true when it comes to water resource. And I think there's a great deal to be gained by that. But it's not going to happen on its own. And that's where federal leadership has to come in. So whether it's quality of water and enhancing the resources that the EPA has to assure that quality, or whether it's from a quantity and conservation perspective, making sure that we're investing in that kind of research. We need to put the federal monies behind that kind of work so that there's less pressure to begin with and fewer situations come up that would require the kind of negotiation of competing interests that happens when there's a need to add to the portfolio to begin with.
I have a question regarding that, actually. So on the topic of water sanitation, I was really excited to see in the plan that you mentioned $20 billion specifically to address the issue of lead in water. That's an issue that doesn't get talked about much in Nevada. We have a lot of new infrastructure, but we do have a lot of infrastructure that was built before the 2014 statutes were put in place.
Yeah.
I've seen estimates that estimate that about, I think, up to $80 billion is what it would cost to replace every lead pipeline in the country. So I'm curious as to how you would prioritize that to make sure a state like Nevada wouldn't be left out.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is try to make the most with the leverage of the federal dollars to try to invite states and communities to put together an integrated plan, because it is different in different communities, as is lead exposure in general. For example, in our city, even though we've had some issues with outdated service lines, the bulk of lead poisoning that happens, and there's a horrific level of it in very close to where I live, has nothing to do with water. It's in the homes. It's in the paint itself. Because houses built before 1978, when the lead paint ban went into effect, are, especially in low-income areas, are likely to still be a threat to the children who live in them. So my point is that when we're attacking an issue like lead, we have to look at different elements that affect different communities differently. But what we know is any improvements or upgrades that rely on water and wastewater rates are disproportionately going to hit low-income people, because, I mean, even more than any kind of tax, a wastewater, it is the last thing that you give up as a low-income family, even after electricity. And we've seen how frequently people are pushed to the brink by poverty. And that's why I also think we need, as part of our housing strategy, bridge funding for people who are vulnerable in that regard. As part of our infrastructure plan overall, making sure that we're supporting not just things like a state revolving fund that can help finance water projects, but also increasing the funding going into build grants, which we usually think about for surface transportation, but might also be something that we could link up to opportunities around water. You're right, the dollars only go so far, and we need to make sure that every different kind of community is getting some level of support without expecting that it can all be solved federally either. And that's where the partnerships that create that leverage are important, as well as federal research on how to make sure that we use the assets we have better. So one of my favorite stories as a wastewater geek in South Bend had to do with the use of technology to save low-income ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars by just managing a wastewater system better. I'm proposing that we create, in the same way we have DARPA, that literally invented the internet, we create an advanced research project agency for infrastructure, ARPA-I, that could help pilot and pioneer methods of delivering clean, safe drinking water that we can't even imagine right now, but that just aren't going to happen unless we have basic research federally backed. So all of these pieces have to click together. There won't be an easy solution, but Nevada won't be left out of that vision.
Any other questions from our panel? Annette?
So one other question, we are very proud of our two national monuments that we have here. I call it the proudest moment of my career when Gold Butte National Monument was designated by President Obama, because it was a very important thing that we had to protect. And so the federal government recently has been outright hostile to our national monuments. 27 of them were under a sham review process that President Trump and his cronies wanted to do away with them. And now we see attacks on Bears Ears and other national monuments. What would your administration do to make sure that more protected land like Gold Butte National Monument happens? And how would you go about making sure that the lands that they're currently attacking under this review process are restored to what the protections need to be?
Yeah, so I would break this into three pieces: administration, legislation, and then alliances, which might be the most important of all. Administration begins with do no harm, right? Obviously reversing the decisions that have been made, ensuring that we have, this is where personnel is policy too, right? So just having people, especially at the top, who understand that this is a trust, understand that these lands were protected for a reason, and that protecting them means ensuring that that there is a very, very high bar for any kind of encroachment, as well as laying out a specific agenda for how we can expand them. That's the administration side. But we don't want to be in another situation where we have to fear, especially as we're trying to make 7-generation decisions, that 4 years from now or 8 years from now we'll be in a different place. That's why I believe we need to take stronger legislative action as well, to create the left and right boundaries on what can happen on public lands to begin with, and to amplify the energy going into protecting and designating more lands. Then comes the part about alliances, because the reality is a lot of what has happened, even within the framework of existing law, a lot of the challenges to that arose not because of what anybody in Washington was doing, but because people directly impacted, people who cared, whether it was Indian country and native voices rising up, whether it was the environmental community, whether it was professionals who worked on these issues and were insisting that the federal government pay more attention. Making sure that there is a partnership between a White House whose best value is to just elevate voices in addition to all the policy, and those who are already integrated in this every day. And it's part of what we're trying to even model a little bit right now as we sit at this table, that we should literally be at the table, ensuring that there can be a red flag put up whenever there is a threat to lands, whether they're already designated or not, so that we are teaming up to work out how to move forward.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming and joining us and being a part of this very important discussion. And Mr. Buttigieg, would you like to offer any closing remarks?
Great. Well, again, I'm humbled to be with a group of those who have been impacted and have been leading on these issues for such a long time. And I'm thankful for the chance here in Nevada to shine a light on an issue that is so important and has been mostly absent from the dialogue in the presidential campaign. These are the decisions that we make that will be judged on long after we are no longer here. And so many day-to-day political concerns command our attention, when if you just look around us, you have a sense of a bigger picture in terms of space, of course, but also in terms of time. And as we put climate at the heart of our vision for the future of the country, as we act to make sure that we're doing right by those who are the youngest among us and those yet to come, so much will depend on ensuring that we put our money where our mouth is, that we establish real and meaningful protections, that we enforce what we already have on the books, and that we invest in innovation for the future. That's what the plan is about, and I really appreciate the input that we've gathered from experts on that plan, and the opportunity to continue to develop these ideas into the administration as we move forward. So thank you again for your leadership here, and thanks to everybody for the work that you do and for being willing to help us shine a light on these issues.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. All right. I'd like to just sit here for a few hours and enjoy this.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm sure they won't let us. Yeah, not a lot of outdoor events in Indiana this time of year, but this is wonderful. We saw a road runner on our way up, so that's already made my day.
Welcome to beautiful Nevada.
Clearly, it's wonderful. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Here. All right.